Hello, everyone. Welcome to our Epstein special live stream. Dimitri, I think we met last week in Colombia before your exciting trip to Venezuela. We did some amazing reporting about the U.S. invasion of Venezuela, the aftermath, as well as the contentious question related to who has control of the oil fields and what does the future of Venezuela look like. I'm still in Colombia. We published a report with Timochenko, the leader of the FARC. It didn't have as many views as I would have hoped it would, but it's an interesting figure who basically spoke about the peace process. But between the last few days and now, we've been hit with a bombshell. 30th of January was the release of the newest release of the Epstein documents. And there's been a lot of action, but also not as much as we would have anticipated, considering the quality of the information that was brought up to us. I would expect a lot more people to be arrested or a lot more investigations going on, but I'm sure we're going to spend the rest of the live stream talking about this. For the people just joining us, feel free to type in which country you're from, where you're tuning in from. I'm in Colombia. Dimitri, I think you're in Montreal. Is that it?
Yes, I am.
And just before we start, right, there's a little comment here by Carol Coutinho who says, where's Laith Marouf? His channel isn't on YouTube anymore. I spoke to Laith a few days ago. Free Palestine TV has been censored from YouTube. The account has been shut down. And I think it's important to show some love to Laith as he's in these challenging times trying to get his channel back up. You could follow most of his content as well on his website, freepalestine.tv. And if you can go and donate and support him, that would be great.
Thank you, Rami. I actually wasn't aware. I received a message from Laith that his email account had been hacked, but I wasn't aware that his channel had been removed from YouTube. That is outrageous. Unfortunately, not surprising. And we'll do what we can to continue to help people to access his channel's outstanding reporting. This man, puts his life on the line every time he goes out into the field in Lebanon, which is almost a daily basis. So before we get into it, I want to just apologize. It appears from the comments there was a little bit of confusion about when we were starting today. The notice we put up was for 2:30 p.m., but I think there might have been a little bit of a miscommunication between me and Rami about whether it was 2 p.m. or 2:30 p.m. Anyways, we're here now. I hope we didn't inconvenience anybody. And just want to say hello to some of the people who've identified themselves or their place of residence. The Land of Mint from Italy, Arrivederci, or is that goodbye or hello? So anyways, thank you for joining us. We have the Looney Link from Vermont. Thank you for being here. And we have a comrade from Ireland and Japan and Berlin. That's quite a mix.
There was someone from Zagreb as well. Zagreb is great. It's not far from, oh God, I forgot, but like 30 minutes away, you have the birthplace of Tito, which I had the pleasure of go visiting.
Indeed. The former president of Yugoslavia he was the founding president of Yugoslavia, if I recall correctly.
I think he led the country for at least 30 years or so, and then him passing away led to, sadly, the disunification of the country. Right.
I see a lot of comments about Jamal Thomas, based on comments we've seen from Jamal and his program. He did indeed have a stroke, and his condition does seem difficult, although last time I heard from Jamal or saw him address his health situation, he expressed a determination to continue and he has our full solidarity and support, and we hope that he's recovering swiftly and fully. And we also have been joined by somebody from Calgary, Alberta, Canada, Co-op W101. Thank you for joining us. Queen of the Pool from Montreal. Great name. And with that, I think we're probably going to start, Rami. And I want to just say one other word before we get into how the Epstein files are terrifying the Trump and Netanyahu regime. And that is, Rami's interview of Timoshenko is really quite interesting and fascinating. It's probably not the most pressing news for most people, because we all are, very much preoccupied for entirely understandable reasons with the events in West Asia and the kidnapping of President Maduro in Venezuela, the threats against Cuba, the humanitarian crisis that's being inflicted upon the extraordinarily courageous people of Cuba, and the subject of this live stream, the Epstein files. But this is an important part of the history of Latin America, and something which is in many ways relevant to what is happening in the region and the broader world today. So if you have a few minutes to take in Rami's excellent interview of Timoshenko, we encourage you to do so. So with that, Rami, let's get started on the announcement made by the Trump or the Netanyahu regime that the war criminal will be coming to Washington yet again. This will be the sixth, I repeat, sixth trip to the United States for Netanyahu since Trump returned to the White House less than 13 months ago. He's coming on average once every 2 months or so. I've never seen anything like it. It's off the charts. No other world leader has come to the U.S. that often since Trump's inauguration in January 2025. No one even comes close. And I doubt that there's been any world leader, even during the Second World War, that came to the United States 6 times in the space of a little more than 1 year. So something's going on, and we're going to try to delve into what that is exactly. Trump and Netanyahu are scheduled to meet in Washington in 3 days' time on Wednesday of this week. So why is the Israeli war criminal coming yet again? Rami, if you could pull up number 1. This is the line that is being repeated by all Israeli media. Netanyahu's coming to address the U.S.-Iran talks and to tell Trump that it is not enough to get a deal on nuclear enrichment. Any deal has to address Iran's missiles and proxies. And what we're hearing is that the evil monster is insisting that Iran effectively deprive itself of the ability to strike Israel with ballistic conventional missiles or any missiles, and that it cut off all support for other resistance groups. And this is not just what you see up on the screen there is a report from the Times of Israel, but this is the unanimous message of all of the Israeli media. When I checked this morning, Haaretz, Ynet, and the Jerusalem Post, in addition to the Times of Israel, they were all repeating that mantra. This is about the negotiations with Iran and Netanyahu's insistence that all 3 of those issues be on the table.
Dimitri, do
Yes.
you feel like, because Trump spoke about reducing Iran's ballistic missiles to under 300 kilometers, do you feel like this is an endorsement that Iran actually made extensive damage to Israel during the 12-day war, and that Iran in some way is an existential threat to Israel?
Well, whether they understand, I think Iran is an existential threat to that tiny pipsqueak of a genocidal country. But I think you're absolutely right, Rami, that the insistence that Iran basically neuter itself from a missile perspective does show that they are very, very concerned, as does the fact that they have not yet attacked Iran. They are extremely concerned about Iran's ballistic missile capability, obviously. And I think the Iranians quite properly are saying that's the only thing that's protecting us right now. So if we give up the ability to strike the genocidal pipsqueak and and American military bases that are more than 300 kilometers from Iran, then we will have no effective deterrent. And then we're going to go the way of the dodo bird. They're going to destroy us the way they've destroyed Syria and try to dismember us. And we'll come back to that. But that's a very important point, Rami. This is proof of how much they fear Iran's ballistic missiles. Now, the Prime Minister's office said, quote, the Prime Minister believes that any negotiations must include restrictions on ballistic missiles and an end to support for the Iranian axis. And I'm going to comment on the negotiating positions of the parties later on, but I just want to note that Iran has said very clearly that it is not going to put ballistic missiles on the negotiating table. That's not touchable. Its support for the axis of resistance is not touchable. It has been consistent in that regard, and it's also said that it will not terminate its nuclear enrichment program. At the most, it will accept significant limits on the degree to which it will enrich uranium, but it already did that under the JCPOA. It agreed to a level of something like 3.67% of enrichment, which is marginally below the level needed for a civilian nuclear program, which is about 5%, and far below uranium. So, and what happened, Trump tore up the deal during his first administration, even though the IAEA certified that Iran was complying with the deal. So again, we'll come back to the negotiating positions later on. I have no doubt, I want to say at the outset, as I explain what I think is going on here, that Netanyahu and Trump will in fact talk about Iran on Wednesday. I have no doubt about that. Iran might even be the main topic of their discussions. But for reasons I'm about to explain, I think that there's going to be at least one other topic on the table, and they don't want us to know that that topic is preoccupying them. And of course, I'm referring here to the Epstein files. Now, to explain to you why I think the Epstein files will be near the top of their agenda, if not at the top of their agenda, I'd like to revisit with you all what happened in late 2025, just a couple of months ago. So on November 19th, 2025, Trump signed into law the Epstein Files Transparency Act after it became apparent to him that he could not stop Congress from adopting the legislation, and he could not overcome, or that Congress would effectively overcome any veto that he applied, because there was almost unanimous support for this legislation in Congress. So he signs it into law on November 19th. By the way, I did a report about a week after that, which talked about the defects in this law. So, for example, it allows documents to be withheld or redacted for national security reasons. That's a big one. You can imagine them saying, well, anything that compromises our ability to defend Israel is a national security issue, therefore we're going to withhold information relating to Israel. They also, Thomas Massey, Ro Khanna, and the others who pushed this legislation allowed the legislation to contain a loophole for documents that are withheld because disclosing them might prejudice an ongoing investigation by the DOJ. This was ridiculous because Trump was saying that there's no basis to investigate anybody at this stage. It was all, Epstein, who they say is dead, and Ghislaine Maxwell, who's already in prison. So there's nothing to investigate. So why would they have an exception for ongoing investigations? But probably the worst defect in this law was that it did not specify a penalty for non-compliance. So it didn't say that, if the Trump administration doesn't comply, then it will be held in contempt of Congress, or that there will be potential jail time for those who violate the law, that there will be massive fines. It didn't lay out any kind of procedure for pursuing or imposing a penalty for non-compliance. So this is a very weak law. And although, I do commend Thomas Massey and Ro Khanna for doing at least that much, we should stop talking about this law as though it was some kind of panacea. In my opinion, what this was designed to do was basically to calm the mob. And I'm a member of that mob, the mob that is demanding accountability. So I think this is a way for them to drip feed information to us until all the perps are basically dead, and to withhold the most damning information. The Democrats, they have the ability on the oversight committee to put out much more information than they have. They've only put out a fraction of the information that they're able to put out. When they were in power, they did nothing, absolutely nothing, even when they had the majority in Congress and the Senate to release this information. So the cover-up is bipartisan, and I think this legislation is more cosmetics than a real effort to impose accountability. But it's something. It's something. In any case, it gets signed into law on November 19th, and the law specified that the legislation, or that the Trump regime was required to release the Epstein files, all of them, except those that were within the exceptions that I cited, national security and ongoing investigations, by December 21st. Okay, it's about 30 days. So on November 19th, it was known at that moment that the Trump regime would have to disclose the Epstein files by December 21st. What happens? On December 12th, about 3 weeks after Trump signed the new law, Netanyahu's office announced that Netanyahu would come to Washington near the end of December for the 5th visit since Trump returned to the White House, the 5th visit in less than a year. Then on December 20th, the day before the Department of Justice was required to release the Epstein files, and did release some of them, NBC News reported that when Trump would come to the U.S. at the end of December, he planned to brief, when Netanyahu, would come to the U.S. at the end of December, he planned to brief Trump on Israeli plans to strike Iran. So if you could pull up image 2, Rami, we'll see there the headline of this big article. And you can see in the section I've highlighted, it says this: Israeli officials have grown increasingly concerned that Iran is expanding production of its ballistic missile program, which was damaged by Israeli military strikes earlier this year, and are preparing to brief President Donald Trump about options for attacking it again, according to a person with direct knowledge of the plans and 4 former U.S. officials briefed on the plans. So that tells you right there that this is a psyop. This isn't one person, deciding they're going to leak information for reasons of conscience. There's coordination going on here between unnamed officials to convince the public that the reason why Netanyahu is going to come to the United States at the end of December is exclusively, because no other reason is mentioned, to talk about Israeli plans to attack Iran. Okay? So you can remove that, Rami. Thank you very much.
Before we do that, there's a Steve Bannon email to Jeffrey Epstein, because again, we've been really deep into these Epstein files over the last week or so. And one of them is an email from Epstein asking Bannon, how do you keep control of a population when it's about to revolt? And Bannon responds by saying, starting a war somewhere else, like invading another country, is a great way of keeping your population in check, because it keeps everyone focused into this new issue. So I feel like in some way, this whole Iran debacle happening at the same time as the Epstein files is kind of proving exactly what Steve Bannon was referring to.
Absolutely. And it's more than Iran, which I'm going to discuss in just a second. But you're absolutely right. And indeed, this is rebellion caliber material. This is what we're talking. This is the type of thing that topples governments and heads of states, and even causes some particularly irate citizens, the peasants, to pull out the pitchforks. So let's then continue with what happens next. So on the 20th, these 5 officials, all of them unnamed, go to the corporate media in the US and say, oh, he's coming to talk about plans to strike Iran. The next day comes the first dump of Epstein documents under the Epstein Files Transparency Act. And from that moment, from the moment that I remember this very clearly, and I was very gratified to see this, the Epstein Files scandal dominated the news cycle right up until the end of December. Like if you looked at the corporate media and particularly the alternative media, this was the #1 subject, and people were coming up with all sorts of stinking, smelling, vile dirt about Epstein and all of these psychopathic billionaires who frequented his dens of depravity. And then Netanyahu arrives in Washington at the very end of December. So by that point in time, I think it's fair to say that, Trump and Netanyahu and not just them, but the people around them and the neocons and the billionaire class were all deeply concerned about the public's preoccupation with the information that was released on December 21st. So the files showed us, amongst many other things, that Trump and Israel both had deeper connections to Epstein than many of us had understood. And I want to just remind people about what I was saying during that week after this story appeared in NBC News about why Netanyahu was coming to Washington again. My interpretation of these events was that was a planted story to distract people from the primary purpose, or at least one of the main purposes of Netanyahu coming to Washington, which was to talk about the Epstein scandal. Because it's a given, it's just a given that every time Netanyahu and Trump get together, they're talking about, somehow attacking Iran. They're obsessed with Iran. Iran is the key to resistance to Western hegemony in this very important region of the world. So they are absolutely fanatically determined to destroy Iran. And it's not news. It's not some kind of, scoop or breaking story to tell us that when Netanyahu meets with Trump, they're going to be talking about Iran. You should assume they always talk about Iran when they get together. Okay, this has been an obsession with Netanyahu going back decades. So why were they planting this story then? I believed, and I said this at the time, it was a distraction because what was really happening was that Netanyahu was panicking about the Epstein files, and he wanted to talk to Donald about stopping the catastrophe from getting any worse, the public relations catastrophe, and find ways of distracting people from what that document dump revealed about Israel and Epstein. So I talked about this, by the way, not only on this show several times. I also talked about this on other programs when I was interviewed, including the Jamal Thomas show. And as far as I know, no one else in the alternative media was arguing that a major reason for Netanyahu's fifth visit to Washington at the end of December was likely to be some kind of, hatching of a plan to deal with the scandal, the burgeoning Epstein scandal. So almost immediately after Netanyahu met with Trump in late December, both corporate and alternative media outlets stopped focusing on Epstein. What happened? First of all, riots erupted in Iran. And we know from statements by former CIA director and the Mossad itself that Mossad agents were involved in important ways in those riots. That's not to say that there weren't legitimate grievances. It's not to say that they started the protests, although Scott Bessent, the U.S. Treasury Secretary, has said straight up that we engineered a sharp decline in the Iranian currency for the purpose of provoking protests, and it worked. He's now said this twice, at least twice publicly. So I'm pretty sure that they were talking about that too when they met at the end of December. But there was much more stuff going on. There was the kidnapping on January 3rd, something like 2 or 3 days after Netanyahu and Trump met, of President Nicolas Maduro from Caracas, which was a criminal violation of the most fundamental precepts of the UN Charter, but it didn't actually result in a change in government. Maybe, Delcy Rodriguez, and I've been talking about this in my reporting for Venezuela over the last week, is going to be somewhat more cooperative than Nicolas Maduro. But until now, there are plenty of indications that she's going to continue, and the people around her, who are all from Nicolas Maduro's government, are going to continue to try their best to protect the sovereignty of Venezuela. So there was that distraction. And then on top of all this, in the lead up to the World Economic Forum in Davos from January 19th to 23rd, Trump was flapping his gums and spewing hot air on an almost daily basis about how the United States was going to take Greenland. Remember that? And so Trump goes to Davos after, intimating that maybe the US would use even military force and threatening to impose sanctions on Europe, crushing sanctions if it didn't allow the United States to effectively confiscate Greenland. He goes to Davos and he folds up like a cheap suit. And he says, well, no, I'm not going to use military force. And, I'm not going to impose sanctions. I'm not going to use tariffs to try to do this. But we're going to find a way. Now, I'm not suggesting that Trump doesn't really genuinely want to take control of Greenland. I believe he does. And I'm not suggesting he doesn't really want regime change in Venezuela. I believe he does. Nor am I suggesting that all of the military assets he sent to the region after he met with Netanyahu, that was another thing that dominated the public discourse, that they aren't ultimately going to be used to attack Iran. They may well be used to attack Iran. But so far, what we've seen during the month of January was a lot of hot air. It was a lot of hot air. The Iranian government is still firmly in place. The Chavista government is still firmly in place. There hasn't been a bombing of Iran. And Trump has folded up like a cheap suit on Greenland. But all of this, posturing worked. It worked to distract people from the Epstein scandal, which, as I've said in other contexts, in my opinion, is the most important scandal of our time. Go ahead, Rami.
Just a little question here is that couldn't the the United States find an easier way to distract us from the Epstein files, such as not releasing the files at all?
Well, then they would have no argument that they're complying with the law. I think Netanyahu believed when Trump came to the White House that none of those documents would ever see the light of day. But what happened was, there was so much pressure on Congress, because what happened, I mean, let's replay this during the presidential campaign and even before the presidential campaign in 2024, in order to win the votes of all the Americans out there, Democrats, Republicans, independents, who were outraged by what we knew about Epstein and his billionaire psychopathic friends. The pressure caused people in Congress to say, we're going to have to do something. We're going to have to give them something. And this led ultimately to the adoption of this law. Remember that Trump was eviscerating any Republican, including in particular Marjorie Taylor Greene. And I have to say, I admire her stand on this particular issue. Eviscerating anybody who said that they were going to go on board with that law. But when it suddenly at the 11th hour became apparent that his threats weren't working, and I think there was like one Republican who was saying he was going to oppose this thing, and he wouldn't be able, even if he vetoed the legislation, they were going to be able to overcome the veto because they can do that with 2/3 of the support of Congress. So at the 11th hour, Trump caved because he knew he couldn't stop the law and he wanted to seem like he actually supported the law. So I think that this was not what Netanyahu and Trump imagined, that this law would be forced upon them. And then they were going to have to release at least some of the documents to convince the public that they were coming clean. Okay, so this is their plan went awry, and I think their plan was no disclosure. Remember what happened? How people were upset when Pam Bondi said, "Oh, there is no list of clients after all," and Bongino and Kash Patel said, "Oh, there's nothing to see here, folks. Move on." This was completely contrary to what all these characters were saying in the run-up to the 2024 election. So it all went awry for them, and so this is how we now find ourselves where we currently are. So to close out my sort of recounting of how this has unfolded, we come to January 21st. The first dump of documents was a small fraction of the documents that were supposed to be released, and a lot of those were heavily redacted. So on January 21st, not January 21st, January 30th, this is about a week after Davos, the Department of Justice releases 3 million plus pages of highly disturbing, shocking, and incriminating documents from the Epstein files. A lot of it is kind of insignificant, banal, but there is a tremendous amount of extremely compromising material in there, and we are only beginning to process it all. We're going to talk to you about some stuff that Rami is working on some really interesting discoveries that he's made. We're not going to get into the nitty-gritty of it, but we ourselves here, and a lot of people in the independent media, a lot of just ordinary citizen journalists, interested members of the public are themselves finding damning material every single day. And there's a lot more to come, I'm sure. So on January 30th, we get this dump, and all of a sudden, we're back to where we were on December 21st, which is that the Epstein scandal is dominating the news cycle. Now it's the number one story. Nobody's talking, or few people are talking about Venezuela. Few people are talking about Greenland, if anybody. Even Iran has kind of taken second place. It is the number one story. And then we get to the announcement that Netanyahu is returning to Washington for his 6th visit. Now, I just want to, before I go on, highlight for you why I think the January 30th disclosure is freaking out the Netanyahu regime. And if you can pull up document number 3, Rami. This is a one of the documents that was released. It is a CHS reporting document generated by the FBI. CHS means confidential human source. This is from October 19th, 2020. Okay. We don't know who the source is. The name has been redacted or withheld, and the case agent's name has been redacted there as well. But the source says, amongst other things, this. Harvard law professor Alan Dershowitz, he's talking about CHS, the confidential human source, learned that Dershowitz influenced many students from wealthy families. For example, Josh Kushner and Jared Kushner were both his students. Dershowitz told confidential human source, so the source, it says Dershowitz said this to him directly, that if he were young again, he would be holding a stun gun as an Israeli intelligence Mossad agent. CHS believed Dershowitz was co-opted by Mossad and subscribed to their mission. CHS still continues to communicate occasionally for Dershowitz. And then underneath, Jeffrey Epstein was represented by Dershowitz. CHS remembered Dershowitz tell Alex Acosta, U.S. Attorney, Southern District of Florida at the time, that Epstein belonged to both U.S. and allied intelligence services. CHS shared phone calls between Dershowitz and Epstein during which she took notes. After those calls, Mossad would then call Dershowitz to debrief. Epstein was close to the former Prime Minister of Israel, Ehud Barak, and trained as a spy under him. And this is the Israeli Prime Minister who has, we now know, stayed repeatedly, and sometimes for extended periods and sometimes with his wife, at Epstein's demonic New York mansion. The report goes on and says, Barak believed Netanyahu was a criminal. Saudi Arabia, Israel, and the UAE are allied against Qatar, Turkey, Iran, and Syria. One of CHS's blank, who presumably worked blanked, asked CHS a lot of questions about Epstein. CHS became convinced that Epstein was a co-opted Mossad agent. See previous reporting. See previous reporting. So there's more of this information coming to the FBI. That's just one piece of the information that they have been given about Epstein being a Mossad agent. And remember, this is a man whom even the U.S. government acknowledges sexually abused over 1,200 young females, over 1,200. That's what they say. Some of them as young as 11. And by the way, I think that number is probably a gross understatement. And almost certainly many of those minors were abused by Epstein associates. And I also think that the age is probably being generous to Epstein. There's evidence we're encountering that some of these victims were much less than 11 years old. And there are even reports, as horrifying as it is, that there were babies that were abused. This is some of the stuff that's emerging from this material. So you don't want to be associated with this man if you are the Israeli government. You want to distance yourself as much as possible from this radioactive psychopath. So what happens about a week or a few days after the January 30th document dump by the DOJ, Netanyahu announces that he's rushing to Washington yet again. So I say to you folks, there's a little bit of a pattern here. I believe Netanyahu and Israel are freaking out, the Israeli political and military elite. As a result of their live stream genocide in Gaza and for a host of other reasons, Israel and the U.S. are now both global lepers. It's gotten so bad that the U.S. and Israeli athletes got booed on Friday at the opening ceremony of the Winter Olympics in Israel. And here's sick of them now. I can no longer stand them. But, when I was a kid, I watched a lot. I don't remember athletes from any particular country getting booed, particularly the United States. It's getting pretty hostile out there for the genocidal entity and its Western backers. And by the way, just before this live stream started, I happened to be watching over lunch a report by Jean Taka, an excellent independent journalist who played video of 4 prominent U.S. athletes, each giving interviews in which I think it was yesterday or the day before, they expressed shame, really, at what the United States is doing, and tried very, very hard to distance themselves from the criminality of the U.S. government, both at home and abroad. So the public relations situation for both Netanyahu and Trump has become dire. And for both of them, there are upcoming elections. In both Israel and the United States, there are going to be midterms later this year. The Netanyahu regime, I understand, needs to go to the polls before the end of this year. So they're very, very concerned about where all of this is heading. And I think the most rational inference is that they are panicking, and they're going to be talking about what to do about it when they meet in 3 days' time. Now, if you don't believe me, or you have skepticism about whether Netanyahu himself is panicking, I think you need only look at his own statements. And he put out a tweet 2 days ago in which he went out of his way to distance Israel from Jeffrey Epstein. And he said, Jeffrey Epstein's unusual close relationship with Ehud Barak doesn't suggest Epstein worked for Israel. It proves the opposite. Stuck on his election loss from over 2 decades ago, Barak has for years obsessively attempted to undermine Israeli democracy. God. As if Netanyahu is the guardian of Israeli democracy. And he goes on and says, by working with the anti-Zionist radical left, yeah, he's pro-Palestinian, Barak, sure. The war criminal, the bloodthirsty savage who has the blood of countless Palestinians on his hands. And he says that he attempted to overthrow Barak, the elected Israeli government. Barak's personal fixation led him to engage in activities publicly and behind the scenes to undermine the government of Israel, including fueling mass protest movements, fomenting unrest, and feeding false media narratives. What a pile of stinking bullshit. The idea or any suggestion that Barak was no longer working in or for the state of Israel and its intelligence agencies after he ceased to be a minister in the government is laughable. I think history has shown that, membership in the genocidal Israeli regime is kind of like Hotel California. You can check out, but you can never leave. I don't believe for 1 second that Barak stopped working in some way for the state of Israel and its intelligence agencies when he ceased formally to be a minister in the government of Israel. But whatever you may think of Barak, the problem with this argument that Netanyahu is making is that it's not just Epstein's relationship with Barak, which strongly suggests, if not outright proves, that Epstein was working for Israeli intelligence. There's a lot more than that. This pathetic attempt to distance Israel from Epstein omitted to mention that Israeli spy Yoni Koren stayed at Epstein's New York mansion repeatedly and for extended periods. And we know this due to some wonderful reporting by Dropsite News. You can see here an article they published, I believe it was in November of last year. And they wrote, an Israeli military intelligence officer stayed at Epstein's Manhattan apartment. It's not an apartment, it's a massive mansion, as we covered in a report we published yesterday, with pictures of naked minor females all over the place. And he stayed there, this spy, on at least 3 occasions, including once in February 2013 while working as a senior aide to then Israeli Minister of Defense, Ehud Barak. So, and it goes on and talks about other ways in which Yoni Koren was involved with of Epstein. And on top of that, I'll just point out one other fact. There is the revelation. Sorry, I don't think that's the one we're looking for. This revelation. Rami, could you just pull up number 7, please? I think there we go. Thank you. This is a December 10th, 2014 email from Epstein to Melanie Spinella. And he wrote, Gratz, Charity, Herzog, Ehud coming to Island this weekend. Come plane 3 issue. I don't know what the hell that means, but in any event, this is very likely a reference to none other than the war criminal Isaac Herzog, the current president of Israel. He appears to have gone to Epstein Island, again, a den of depravity, in 2014. So this is just scraping the surface of the evidence, which shows that Epstein was working with Israeli intelligence and was in some way working in and for the state of Israel. So Netanyahu and company have a huge uphill battle from a public relations perspective if they're going to try to persuade people that Epstein was not somehow working with or for the Mossad. So yeah, for all of those reasons, folks, I'm highly confident that the Epstein files will be high on the agenda when Netanyahu meets with Trump on Wednesday. The most important question for us is, what can we expect to emerge from that meeting? And based on what happened after the last time they met during heightened attention to the Epstein scandal, we have reason to be very concerned. I think they are going to talk about doing all kinds of dastardly evil shit to bury the story yet again. And of course, one way they might do that is by finally launching their much cherished war on Iran again, with untold consequences for us all. But I also wouldn't rule out something else, something even more surprising, less expected. And I'm not saying this is going to happen. I don't have any evidence to suggest that it will, but I'm just throwing this out there as one way they might try to deal with the public relations crisis that they're in, and that is a false flag. I wouldn't even rule out the possibility that some crazy shit happens at the Super Bowl tonight. But again, I'm not saying that's going to happen. I don't have any evidence to suggest it's going to happen. I'm just saying that this is the way these people think. I've seen some reports in the last few days that some Israeli was arrested in California. There are allegations that he was operating a biolab. He's been charged with firearms offenses. I don't know what that's all about, and I haven't had time to really investigate it. But keep your eyes open, because I think we're looking at a very tumultuous several weeks ahead as these two criminals try to bury the evidence of their involvement with Epstein. So finally, I want to talk about Iran's negotiating position. Let's recall that Israel is the only state in West Asia that has nukes. It's the only state that is not a party to the non-nuclear proliferation treaty, or the nuclear non-proliferation treaty, and it doesn't undergo, and never has, independent inspections of its nuclear facilities. So for it to be demanding that Iran deprive itself of the ability to enrich uranium, which Israel does to weapons grade, is outrageous. It's outrageous that the media keeps repeating uncritically the demands of Israel, the purported concerns of Israel and the United States over Iran's nuclear program, without mentioning Israel's nukes. If we should be concerned about anybody's nukes or nuclear program, it should be Israel. Because after the way this psychopathic entity has behaved, particularly during the last 2+ years of genocide, there is every prospect that these people would use nuclear weapons. In fact, they're the most likely candidate to use nuclear weapons against a state that hasn't attacked them. So how can it be right that they are trying to deprive Iran of the ability even to enrich uranium for civilian purposes when Israel enriches to the level of weapons-grade uranium and has nukes and is committing genocide. And if the Iranians actually complied with the demands, including the emasculation of their conventional ballistic missile program, or if for any reason the current government of Iran were to fall, I think we should anticipate that what they're going to do is they're going to destroy the country. If they can actually bomb the bejesus out of Iran, demolish its essential infrastructure, demolish its military capacity to defend itself, and do that with little risk of harm to themselves, they'll do it, just as they did in Syria. After Assad fell, they went hog wild in bombing and occupying even more territory in Syria. Their goal is to destroy, not just regime change, their goal is to destroy and dismember Iran so that whoever comes to power in the future, it will not be able to resist Israeli-American hegemony over the region. And so all those people out there who are being critical of the Iranian government and hoping and wishing that it falls, my message to you is this, that whatever you may think about it, and however justified your criticisms of it may be, the only thing right now that is standing in the way of the destruction of Iran as a viable state is that government. That's it. You may not like that. You may wish it weren't true, but that's the reality. And so if you care about the people of Iran and you care about the sovereignty of Iran, at this particular moment, you shouldn't be out there cheerleading for this government to fall, because who's going to defend Iran if that happens? Is it going to be the son of the Shah? Really? That corrupt little twerp is going to defend Iranian sovereignty from the Americans and the Israelis? I don't think so. And in light of all this, Rami, and I'm curious your thoughts about this, I wonder why Iran even bothers. I have some theories about this, but why is Iran even bothering to talk to these shyster, criminals, these genocidal lunatics, Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, who know absolutely nothing about Iran? They know next to nothing about the region. They are con artists who, at least Witkoff, before Kushner entered the Iran negotiations, he tried to lull Iran into a false sense of security while Israel was preparing to attack it. So I've been wondering a lot about why they even bother talking to these criminals. And I have theory about this, but I'm curious, Rami, do you have a theory about this?
Well, I think there's a very clear pattern between the resistance in Gaza negotiating with Israel and the United States for the so-called ceasefire, as well with Russia, that has been part of thousands of rounds of negotiations with Ukraine to put an end to this war in Ukraine, and as well as Iran, which is, sometimes I also ask myself this question. It's absurd to even negotiate with the United States knowing the track record that they have. But I think that the reality is that Russia, Hamas, the resistance in Gaza, as well as Iran, need to show openness to their people back home that they're doing all their efforts they can to bring an end to the war. And I think not everyone is knowledgeable within these countries, right, about the reality of how geopolitics works. But the reality is that they need to entertain all avenues to then say, we've exhausted all efforts. This is the last opportunity available to us. Because sometimes I ask myself the same question about Gaza. Why is the resistance participating in these negotiations for ceasefire? We see Israel violating every single measure in the ceasefire, yet we're still invested in it. Same thing for Russia. Russia, 2 months into the special military operation, to this war, signed an agreement to put an end. They withdrew from Kharkiv. They withdrew from many of these territories, only to see Ukraine and NATO not participate. But the reality is that in some ways, Russia and Palestine are much more democratic countries. These governments need to win the support of their people every single day. The United States, not so much. Israel, not so much. They should win the support of the elite. Hence why I think we are in a bit of a different situation, and we need to sit down at the table and negotiate with the United States, all while understanding that these are basically Trojan horses meant to open the door while we manufacture consent in the West, while my fellow colleagues in Canada are participating in legitimizing the invasion of Iran, right? This whole part of negotiation is meant to create this charade that we've done everything that we can to negotiate with Iran, and now the next step is to invade. But I mean, I think the onus is on us.
I agree. I think this is very likely. Iran is trying in good faith to have a discussion with them within reasonable limits, because that's what a lot of people in Iran want. They want them to make an effort. I think probably Russian and Chinese governments want to see the Iranians at least make an effort. I think the Iranians themselves want people in the broader world to see that they're reasonable people. And another thing that might be going on here, Rami, is that they are trying to buy time because they need more time to prepare for an attack. You know, they've got people perhaps being trained on new air defense systems. Maybe they have new missile systems that they have to work out. You know, there have been reports that they got advanced Russian fighter jets and their pilots may be training. So it may be that every day that passes is a day that they become stronger in their ability to defend themselves from these monsters. So there are a number of legitimate reasons why they might be doing that. One thing I will say, sort of in passing, I think I have to say I have a lot of courage I have a lot of admiration for the courage of this Iranian foreign minister, because he's going out there into the broader world and is, I think, making a pretty good case for Iran. He's soft-spoken. He speaks English well. He's an elegantly attired man. He seems reasonable. He's the kind of spokesperson that the Americans and the Israelis don't want, you know, any resistance group or any state that resists U.S. hegemony to have. And these mofos are perfectly capable of killing this man. And if they decide they want to go down that path and have another war, I think he's going to be at or near the top of their target list. I doubt very much that he doesn't understand that. I think he probably does understand that, and yet he continues to go out into the world in situations where he's leaving himself vulnerable to some assassination attempt, and to do the best that he can to represent his country. So we'll have to see how that all unfolds. The last thing I want to just share on this subject of why Netanyahu went to, or is coming again to Washington, is this little tidbit, this little report that sneaked into the Israeli media today. An Israeli court cancels Netanyahu trial hearings ahead of White House visit. So what happened was the judges presiding over Netanyahu's corruption trial approved his request to cancel hearings scheduled for Tuesday and Wednesday, following his announcement that he will travel to Washington. So the criminal, the mafioso, managed to get a further delay in the hearing of his corruption trial by saying, hey, guess what? I'm going back to Washington. So I'm sure that also was a little bit of a factor. So that's my interpretation of events. I'm going to turn it over to Rami. And before I do that, I just want to say I don't mean to be, this isn't a teaser per se. We wanted to talk to you today about a very important discovery that Rami has made in the Epstein files. We think it's quite important, but there's a lot of additional documents to review, and it involves some pretty explosive allegations. Rami, what can you tell us, just sort of in generic terms on a no-names basis, about what you think you found?
So my first assumption, well, there's this whole discussion online going about, or in mainstream media, that either Epstein is some malicious multimillionaire who was running this honey trap scheme for reasons of his own personal gains. And I think we all have a lot of trouble believing that. But the alternative to that would be that Epstein was a intelligence agent, right? Whether it was for the Mossad, CIA, whatever. Or if you're part of CNN and Daily Mail, the KGB, which has dissolved in 1991. And if he was part of some agency, then it must mean that he had a team behind him, and that there must have been kind of a hierarchy around how information was being reported. And that would also mean that, so basically that brought me to searching what kind of influence did Epstein have over, let's just call it these like satellite states of the United States of Israel, right? Whether it is countries such as Ukraine, Kosovo, the UAE, among others. I don't want to dive too deep into this. And through my research, I was able to pinpoint an individual, which I believe, which is very clear, worked for Jeffrey Epstein. I have information on the contract and his form of remuneration. and I also have information around the types of access to powerful people that person had. If Epstein was a part of an intelligence agency, it means that this honeypot operation is most likely continuing to operate, or there are other people that need to be targeted for their complicity in these operations. And I believe that I've pinpointed an individual through these leaks. There's a couple of people online talking about this individual, but I want to, first of all, go through all 200 pages. Was it 200? Yeah, 200 pages of information related to this individual. I also want to find every form of metadata that we could find online so that we could build a proper story about how this guy got in touch with Jeffrey Epstein, what was he doing for Jeffrey Epstein, how did he absorb Jeffrey Epstein's network, and where is he right now? And that leads me, yeah, go for it, Dimitri.
Just to clarify, based on the information you've shared with me, and we don't need to get any detail here, please correct me if I'm wrong, the primary job of this individual was to go to certain countries in the global south and to recruit minors to be abused and trafficked by Epstein and his billionaire psycho associates. Is that correct?
Absolutely. And just to keep in mind that while there were other individuals between 2017 or so until today that we kind of pinpointed as working for Jeffrey Epstein, one of them, his name is Jean-Luc. He committed suicide.
That's Jean-Luc Brunel, right? That wasn't he involved with the haute couture fashion industry in Paris and
modeling, quote unquote.
Yes, that's right.
Now this other individual is off the hook at the moment, and I believe, and that person had access to high-profile individuals in Thailand, in Qatar, in other countries. And then you really ask yourself, how can you as a photographer, right? I mean, just the first claim here, Dimitri, is that you've said that certain emails of Jeffrey Epstein were censored for national security purposes. If anyone hacks my emails, other than my social security number, there's not a single information that anyone would need to censor for national security. So I mean, again, this is a photographer that worked for Jeffrey Epstein, a photographer, right, quote unquote, right? We all need to have that little side gig just to legitimize ourselves. And he had access to high up individuals. He claims in one of the emails that he attributed the ASEAN Peace Prize to some princess in Thailand. That's just enough information I'm ready to give right now, and I'm sure you guys could pinpoint who that individual is by going to the Epstein file documents. But then again, right, it's like, how do you go from being a modeling recruiter to being able to give away peace prizes to individuals and facilitate connections with Qatari emirs amongst other forms of heads of states? And that just makes it seem that although he's not as powerful and strong as Jeffrey Epstein, I think Jeffrey Epstein's net worth was at $550 million. It just helps us build a portrait around what this organization looks like and who should we go after next. Whether Epstein is dead or not, it's unlikely we will ever find out where he is right now or what he's up to or anything of this sort. But the reality is that there are people that left paper trails and we should go after while we can before they, So that leads me to my little rant over here, is that since January 30, Western media, mainstream media, has been talking about Jeffrey Epstein, and conveniently, they've always been leaving out the elephant in the room, the intelligence agencies, the fact that he played a role as a spy. Sometimes I've been doubting myself because it seems like it's absurd how CNN, Daily Mail, Bloomberg, I mean, whatever, you name the mainstream media, has all been ignoring the fact that Jeffrey Epstein is a agent, or and if anything, they've been leaking the facts that he was part of the KGB working for Putin, the classic. And by doing so, there's very little to no accountability served to the victims. Mainstream media have been distracting us with these bogus claims that he's been running this as a lone wolf honeypot blackmail, all while Ehud Barak, the prime minister of Israel, the minister of defense, was just masking himself with a scarf, getting into his house. And that's despite the massive amount of evidence linking him to Mossad. While it is quite clear that the governments of the world, at least the ones listed in the Epstein files, such as the US, UK, Norway, Sweden, France, Thailand, UAE, amongst others, are compromised at the very core through Epstein's espionage, there has been barely any individuals who have been investigated for security breach or criminal acts that have committed on this island. Dimitri, if I'm a member of the Canadian government and I see what the hell's going on, the first thing I would do is run an audit to see where's the security breaches. Obviously, that hasn't been done. And there has been no mention of purges or investigations to what kind of security protocols that have been violated. And it doesn't seem like governments are in a hurry to patch up and fix any form of security breaches. And then you see these kinds of emails. I'm just going to share like one screenshot over here of the type of information Epstein had access to. You look at this one over here. You shared on your Twitter. If it's okay with you, Shlomo will join us for lunch on Sunday. What time? Among other things, Shlomo was a senior commander of the Lebanese army for a week while he was with the IDF. Don't ask. I mean,
so this is from Tom Pritzker to Epstein. Could you tell us who Tom Pritzker is, Rami?
He was running this Pritzker investment fund. I'm not too sure. I mean, if you have more information on him, please feel free to share.
Yeah. So Pritzker was a billionaire, and by the way, there is a photo of him in the Epstein files with Ehud Barak. He's sitting at a table, I think it's in their New York mansion, with Ehud Barak, Woody Allen, and Epstein. So this guy, I'm just trying to pull up. He's an American billionaire and businessman, a member of the Pritzker family. He is the chairman and chief executive officer of the Pritzker organization, which manages various assets, including Hyatt Hotels Corporation.
Yes, exactly. Yes. I'm not saying I Hyatt ever again, although I like their bedrooms. Never going back. Never going back.
So he's telling this guy, Pritzker, how does Pritzker know this about Shlomo? But the Shlomo was the senior commander of the Lebanese army
for a week
while he was with the IDF, and then says, "Don't ask." Wow, like this is just another tidbit that Israel does not want you to see.
Lebanese media is not talking about this. First thing I would do is run a full-on investigation into every single rank of the Lebanese army. What the hell's going on? Are there any more Shlomos? What year did this happen? Was this during the Lebanese Civil War, right? 1980s, when when Israel had a presence in Beirut, when they basically conquered Beirut for a couple of days. And then it makes you wonder what form of you see this Lebanese army, Lebanese government has been cracking down on Hezbollah, fighting Israel's war on behalf of Israel and cracking down on Hezbollah. You see these types of messages. Makes you wonder what the hell's going on in Lebanon right now. And then this is during this live stream, I found this this other interesting Epstein file. No, that's not the right one. That's not the right one. Anyways, it was related to Sheldon Adelson. Anyway, so there's these documents about how I'll share my screen. I just need to find the proper one. It's called it ends in 94. Okay, share screen. Yeah, this one over here. Can you guys see my screen? No, not yet.
Not yet. There it is. You can just put that in the studio.
So the first one, it talks about Adelson. It says, Bolton only doing what Sheldon Adelson tells him to do. I got John the job, but he will not cross Sheldon. This is John Bolton. Right?
Why would they delete the sender's name and the names of the recipients? That's crazy. These people aren't Epstein victims.
No, why not? Absolutely. And by the way, if you're an American, the first thing if you're America first, by the way, right? This is American sovereignty, America first, whatever. This is the first. You read this message, it really makes you wonder who the hell is running foreign policy. Clearly not these boards where they appoint these people, Congress, Senate, whatever you want to call it. Bolton only doing what Sheldon Adelson tells him to do. Sheldon Adelson, this Jewish billionaire, who his wife, Miriam Adelson, is it Miriam Adelson? I forgot her name.
Yes.
Running the foundation. What the hell? Sheldon Adelson taking orders from, Bolton taking out orders from Sheldon Adelson and not the president. And I got John the job. And then next up, some dude says he is MBZ, the leader of the UAE. Get him. Get actionable deal. I mean, really makes you wonder, this whole conspiracy that people are talking about ends up being much more true than we think it does. And then the next one is this little quote here that says, you can explain to your boys that the linchpin in the Middle East is Qatar. Blockade lifted. They can help on many fronts. And then you see just conveniently today, there was the Al Jazeera Congress going on where the leader of Hamas, we're not sure if he's actually the leader of Hamas yet, but Khalid Mishal is talking over there. Qatar has been running all peace negotiations amongst with Israel. Qatar had got a couple, was it in Qatar? Anyways, where Hamas members were targeted in Qatar. I believe they escaped the assassination attempt. Qatar is a Trojan working hand in hand along whoever these redacted handlers are. Well, that's in this case, it's Jeffrey Epstein, iTunes. You can explain to your boys that linchpin in the Middle East is Qatar. Blockade lifted. They can help in many fronts. I woke up from the whole Qatar pill a few years ago, but I hope this wakes up people today.
Well, and we were saying, Rami, last year, it's unthinkable that Trump did not know about the Israeli intention to attack Qatar. And, there is, I was there a couple of years ago in Qatar for the first time. I went out to that Al Udeid military base, the largest U.S. military base in the region. It's just a few dozen kilometers from Doha. And I think that military base, by the way, is a joint operation. It's not just the U.S. that operates there. The Qatari military operates there, and so do the British, and possibly other Western militaries as well. And I find it very difficult to believe, I said this last year, I continue to believe it, that the Qatari elite themselves were not aware that Israel was going to try to assassinate the Hamas negotiators. Maybe they weren't, but did they impose any consequences on Israel? After they said that this was an act of international terrorism, did they sanction Israel? Did they sever ties to Israel? Did they retaliate militarily to Israel? They did nothing. They just flapped their gums and let Israel get away with it.
There's this article that came out not too long ago, forgot where I read it today, about how Israel's leveraging reconstruction as leverage to control Gaza. So you basically, and Qatar is that wing. Qatar is basically reconstructing Gaza on behalf of Israel. And it allows Qatar to enter Gaza or revoke Qatar's presence in Gaza. And I think this is why us as Palestinians should immediately be extremely wary. Do we want Qatar as a partner that is being leveraged by Israel, and while using this good cop face on behalf of Israel, right? Qatar is a good cop. It tells us when we're wrong and when we're right.
Exactly.
And then, so this was my intention of showing you these screenshots, right, of Jeffrey Epstein talking about MBZ and Qatar and Sheldon Adelson and John Bolton, is that it shows that that Jeffrey Epstein is not just a strange figure running a honeypot scam to enrich himself. He has a bigger interest in politics than he does in young children, and he loves young children. Mm-hmm. And then that brings us to, okay, well, there are names being thrown out left and right into these documents. One of them was Jack Lang. And if anyone saw our Dieudonné interview, right, because just a little plug here, we have a French channel called Radio Resistance, which is a sister channel or brother channel of Reason to Resist. And we interviewed Dieudonné there. In my interview with Dieudonné, I asked him about this guy called Jack Lang. He was the former Minister of Culture, former Minister of National Education in France, and current president of the Institute of the Arab World, right? It's not an Arab running the Institute of the Arab World in Paris. It's redacted who's running it. And in that, and I asked him about how this guy is able to basically use the Institute of the Arab World as a front to normalize relations with Israel. And he says, well, this guy is a strange figure. And when you read his Wikipedia page in French, not in English, because he purposely left it out in the English page of Jack Lang, this guy has been promoting normalization of relationship between adults and children. Since the 1960s, 1970s, 1980s, this guy has been basically promoting pedophilia in France. And today we threw him under the bus. He has resigned from his role at the Institute of the Arab World. He's still keeping all of his honors of being a historic minister of culture. He launched the Festival de la Musique, right? So one day in France, all over the country, there's music played in the streets. This guy's still keeping his honorific titles. But he has been a pedophile not since the Epstein files came out, since he publicly put his name on petitions promoting pedophilia. But now today he resigns, saying he's a distraction, and the Epstein files have called him out. And then similarly, we have Morgan McSweeney, chief of staff of Keir Starmer, saying that he's resigning today because he was the one who told Keir Starmer to appoint Peter Mandelson to become the the UK ambassador to the UK ambassador to the US, and he has his role as a House of Lords in the UK, the British Parliament, for what, like over 20 years. This is nothing new. We always knew these guys were creepy. We always knew these guys had roles with Epstein, but it's only today, after the 30th of January, that these people are taking the hit. They're taking the hit on behalf of Keir Starmer, on behalf of François Mitterrand, on behalf of François Hollande, of Emmanuel Macron, on behalf of Donald Trump. There's a special class of people that we're willing to throw into the bus to protect the elites that benefited off of Jeffrey Epstein. Keir Starmer took his role seriously in targeting Jeremy Corbyn, every single pro-Palestinian figure in the UK that were part of the Labour Party. Palestine Action. You would think this guy has the power of looking deeply into people's history and making sure that they're textbook perfect, whatever, right? Well, prefects knowing how to run a government. Yet he has protected and shielded Mandelson until the very end, just until he was able to throw him under the bus in order to keep Keir Starmer and these elites that are still collaborating with Jeffrey Epstein's and their likes, shielding away Mossad responsibility in their control of the UK government. And I'm probably forgetting some other name here. And this is my biggest concern, is that will there ever be true justice if we're throwing these people under the bus rather than keeping the real people accountable? Keir Starmer, where is he? When will he face justice? And then finally, and this is just me over here protecting Dieudonné, because in one of the emails over here, we have Dieudonné, it says, hi, Jeff, do you want to know what I think of it? That we are between Kafka and National Socialism. I was sent a recent video from a French politician called Dieudonné. Dieudonné is not a French politician. He never got elected. He's a comedian, a stand-up comedian, about Jews and money. Outrageous that this is still said today and in France. The worst is the number of viewers. I want to discuss this with you when I come to New York. This is from the Rothschild to Jeffrey Epstein, the 20th of December, 2013. 1 week after this meeting with Jeffrey Epstein, Dieudonné was blackballed in France. All of his shows were canceled. He could we did our interview with him. He talks about the level of persecution. That's 1 week after meeting Jeffrey Epstein by this Rothschild person. So in some way, Jeffrey Epstein, representing the Rothschild, through his connections, probably Jack Lang and other political elite in France, ended up targeting Dieudonné.
Sorry, Rami, I just want to clarify one thing. You said 1 week after meeting. Are you saying that 1 week after Aline de Rothschild sent this email to Epstein? So I don't think this email was the first time they met. I think that Epstein and Rothschild went back many years, right? Yes,
I'm talking specifically about the Dieudonné case. 1 week after meeting, right?
About the Dieudonné case?
Yes, 1 week after Dieudonné got canceled. And you want to believe this guy's just running a honeypot blackmail scheme for his own personal gains? Surely, this is clearly intelligence work done to change public opinion in France on Israel. And I
don't think I've never heard him talk about Jews and money. He has talked about Zionist wealth, and that's what he talked about when you interviewed him.
Of course.
So There's multiple misrepresentations in Rothschild's email to Epstein about Dieudonné.
And then if anyone is going to target Dieudonné, will it be a guy running a pedophile ring? Would it be, I mean, is that the morality we're at now where pedophilia is more acceptable than freedom of speech? So we're going to cut the crap over here. And I personally think that right now, what we need to do is a hierarchy of individuals listed in the Epstein files and basically run the equivalent of a Schindler's List. Mm-hmm. Everyone who has blood on their hands, everyone who has pedophilia on their hands, everyone who has committed crimes need to be targeted one after the other, from Bill Gates to whoever we have next on that list. We need to have a targeted approach going one after the other and making sure that we have true justice and that this Mossad control over organizations, we're going to have future reports where I'll talk more about those, are cleansed truly from the Labour Party that got Jeremy Corbyn out of power. Jeremy Corbyn was going to be guaranteed Prime Minister of the UK after the failure of the successive Conservative governments. They took him down before he can run for the elections so that they could put this Keir Starmer guy who was shielding pedophiles into power, and now he's cleansing himself off of any responsibility by throwing Mick Sweeney and Madelson under the bus when he's the culprit.
Yeah, that's not accountability. It's not accountability when you have to resign, as Mandelson did, from being the UK's ambassador to the United States. Not accountability when Jacques Lang has to resign from being the head of the Institut du Monde Arabe. It's not accountability when Larry Summers leaves his position at Harvard. Accountability for these criminals is jail, long jail sentences, and in some cases for the rest of their damn putrid, disgusting lives. That's accountability. And if we don't hold them accountable, we will continue to be oppressed and abused by them, and the situation will become even worse. They will be emboldened by their impunity.
What form? I mean, we spoke about Jeffrey Epstein. He got caught, whatever. I mean, whether he's still alive or not, I mean, I think it's safe to say that he has limited amount of influence today. Where are the other Epsteins? Where are the other forms of places where Epstein's and his likes are still infiltrating and influencing policy? And I think this is, we need to hold accountable Keir Starmer and their likes, but also run these audits. What form of what has changed? How are we going to make sure that the Canadian government, the U.S. government, who cares about the U.S. and the Canadian government? How are we going to make sure that these Western governments, although this is probably Jeffrey Epstein working on their behalf, going to shield themselves from any future wrongdoings? I mean, we threw these Norwegian random people under the bus, and it's the entire Western world. Jeffrey Epstein was talking about the war in Ukraine, talking about these great opportunities that can come out of this. I have other documents I need to go through about him talking about Crimea. That was after 2014. That's my little rant, Dimitri.
Quite a rant. Thank you very much, Rami. So shall we take a few questions before we call it a day? We've been going for an hour and 20 minutes or so. We certainly have a time for some questions.
Yeah, I saved some in the chat, but if you could. So if you can post your questions into the chat, I'll try to save them as I see them pass by. Make sure to make them visible with a lot of question marks and stuff like that, just so that it makes it easier for me to notice them. In the meanwhile, I pinned some statements that were written. So this is one over here, which is, Rami, can Russia, etc., go after these criminals, pedos, through Interpol? Dimitri, I'm sure you have a better answer to this than me, but my first concern is, can we take seriously the ICJ, the ICC, Interpol, all these organizations, when we notice how compromised these organizations are? I would love to believe Interpol could take out these measures and bring justice, but justice will not come by Russia and China getting involved into these organizations. I truly believe we need to create these new world orders. I truly believe we need to have these new alliances. I truly believe we need, any reasonable country should see the United States as a Trojan horse. Whenever they open an embassy in your country, terrible things come out of there.
To answer the question, I'm a lawyer Canada and the United States, but not in Russia. So I could be wrong about this, but I suspect that Russian law stipulates that they could prosecute Epstein, well, one of the criminals involved in the Epstein cabal, only if the crimes were committed on Russian soil, in territory over which Russia has jurisdiction. And if that didn't happen, then a criminal court in Russia, I suspect, would not have jurisdiction to pursue them, and they would not ask Interpol to issue a red notice for the arrest of these people. As I understand it, by the way, Interpol doesn't do the arresting. Interpol is an agency through which a state asks other states to effect an arrest. And Interpol issues something called a red notice, which to some degree states are obliged to respect. But I don't think Russia will do that here unless it has compelling evidence that one or more of these crimes was committed on Russian soil.
Sorry, just someone posted on the chat that Hussam Abu Safia might have died, so I'm just going to do some research here.
Who?
There's no, I don't see any credible posts about Dr. Hussam being killed. Okay. Other questions that we might have. So this is a nice question over here by I like to go to lunch 46. Question: What do you think will result of the Epstein file release be? Anything will happen?
That's very hard to say. There's a range of possible outcomes in my view. One is that there's going to be a rebellion, outright revolution in a number of Western states, and which could unfold in a number of ways and have unknown consequences. I think at a bare minimum, you're going to see what we're seeing now, which is people are going to be resigning from their positions. They're going to be removed from government posts. They're going to be embarrassed. They may go into hiding for a while. That is, I think, the bare minimum. And really, how far accountability goes is going to depend on us. And our first of all, enforcing the Epstein fence, ensuring that it's respected, that legislation to the maximum possible degree, forcing our governments to disclose all relevant evidence. And by the way, my own personal opinion is the most powerful evidence, the evidence that will really rock everybody's world, is if we see the videos of these people abusing minors. Now, I know that is a horrifying thought. I know that there is a strong impetus to keep all of that under wraps. I think there are ways to, of course, you want to protect the victims. But I think there are ways of disclosing that information in redacted form, videos, which focuses entirely on the conduct of the perpetrator and exposes them in all of their monstrousness. I think that is the most powerful evidence. And if people actually see these people, these monsters, on video committing these crimes, or at least photographic evidence with proper protections for the victims, whether it be by way of redactions, using techniques to mask their voices and so forth, give us some indication of how these people actually conducted themselves behind closed doors, these monsters. That will rock the world, I think. It's terrible to contemplate. I don't want to have to see any of that. I'm sure nobody listening to us wants to have to watch any of it. But we need to know the truth about what these people actually did. And emails is not going to convey the full monstrousness of what they did.
Also, I think one thing that is absurd is the way media picked up the Me Too story back in 2014, 15, 16, and how we went over what's it called again? Bill Cosby, right? All these actors. We have here a pedophile ring being run and managed by our leaders, yet the energy of Me Too has completely disappeared, and really makes you wonder why. We have this question here that says, why are the documents being taken credibly when the CIA had years to change and doctor them?
That's an important question. This is actually one of the reasons why we decided not to disclose to everybody at this time what Rami has found about this perpetrator, this apparent perpetrator, this recruiter of minors, because what you have is unsworn testimony in these emails. None of the people who wrote them has been subjected to cross-examination under oath. In many cases, we don't even know who the speaker is, who the person writing the email is. And so it's really hard to know what evidentiary value to assign to these emails. All we can do is report what's in them and try to find some way of verifying the accuracy of what's claimed in the emails. But that's a very difficult task. I think that's an important question you ask Space Cowboy 420. Do we have another question, Rami?
Yes, another question over here, which was
I see somebody said parents of children that were trafficked are running an ad during the Super Owl. I take it that's bull. That is interesting. You're hardly going to find a bigger audience than that. I'll be looking out for that tonight.
Why are U.S. politicians left off the hook and not European key figures?
Why are U.S. politicians left off the hook and not Cuba? Because the U.S. has a lot more power than I think that's the short answer. So, I was actually thinking a lot about this yesterday. Thank you for that question. I was thinking about how, Mandelson is being thrown under the bus, as Rami said, the former UK ambassador to the United States. But if you compare what we know about Mandelson to what we know about Trump and his connections to Epstein, Trump is far worse. And, nobody's demanding, at least not in the corporate media, that Trump resign. I don't even think the Democrats are demanding that Trump resign, despite everything we've learned about his unsavory, filthy, grotesque connections going back decades to this monster, Jeffrey Epstein, and the allegations that have surfaced in the most recent, it is alleged in these documents that Trump raped a child and threatened to kill a child when the child complained about what had been done to her. And there are other beastly allegations against Trump in these documents. So as far as I know, I haven't heard Chuck Schumer say that Trump should resign. Have you, Rami? It's amazing. And why? Because they have a lot more power than, creeps like Mandelson.
And that's why I think there's power above Epstein as well. Because if Epstein still have leverage over the people, although he's dead, missing, gone, means someone else can enforce it.
Yeah. I think we have time for one or two more questions, if there are any, Rami.
One more, because
I saw one about Trudeau, which is now no longer on the screen.
I don't see the Trudeau one, but what do you?
I just want to say quickly. I can't remember exactly what the question was, but it had to do about the Trudeau in the Epstein files. I searched a number of names of Canadian political figures in the Epstein files, and including Trudeau, and didn't come up with anything significant in there. So I searched some other. I also searched Stephen Harper's name. Nothing significant came up. Just for kicks, I searched my own name. I don't know if you've done that, Rami, and nothing came up. I kind of was disappointed about that because I was hoping that some of those people were saying nasty shit about me because of my criticism of Israel. But apparently they didn't give a damn about me, which is so be it.
We need to escalate whatever we're doing, Dimitri, because we're not bothering enough.
Yeah.
Okay, so maybe let's just do one more question because it's getting around lunchtime over here. Well, that's a similar question to the one related to accountability, but it's more about what avenues do we have to prosecute the perpetrators of these crimes? No one has been targeted. Bill Clinton has been targeted. When do we get, what tangible ways can we get justice? And obviously if no justice is provided, there are consequences. You spoke about revolt. I truly hope the American people are not docile enough to truly go through the rugs. But
unfortunately, a very important question Zunka 1972 is asking. We have this concept in the West, in systems that legal systems that derive from the British legal system, as the United States and Canada do, and Australia. You have this concept of prosecutorial discretion. And if the people charged with enforcing the law decide not to do anything, there's very little that you can do, other than apply political pressure on them to act. So right now, the Department of Justice is in the hands of complete sycophants, Donald Trump sycophants. The FBI. I mean, you got to get rid of the people at the top of these organizations and replace them with truly independent actors. So you got to get rid of Payam Bondi. You got to get rid of Kash Patel. As long as people like that are running these organizations, these institutions, I don't think you're going to see any prosecutions in the United States. So hopefully, the Americans will prosecute Prince Andrew. They could do that because he committed his crimes. I think it's pretty clear at this stage that Andrew is a pedophile and a rapist. That's my opinion. Mandelson, I believe he broke British law. Somebody, I think in the chat, mentioned a few minutes ago that they thought he committed treason. That may well be the case. But he appears to have violated British law as well. Maybe we can get the ball rolling by, forcing some prosecutions in Europe, and then, authorities in the United States will feel obliged to follow. I don't know. But right now, these institutions that are charged with the responsibility to enforce the law are dominated by people who have absolutely zero evidence of holding any of these criminals accountable.
And many of these affiliates of Jeffrey Epstein have multiple citizenships. The guy I'm investigating doesn't have American citizenship. I feel like ICE should be targeting these people who are causing trouble. And the other question I'm hoping people ask themselves, I'm sure our audience are already aware of this, but are the Mossad likes, these people involved with Epstein, are they allies of the American people? They're clearly allies of Bill Gates and his of the American military, of the American government. But do these people have the best interest of the American people? And if not, then what kind of revolt should we see from the Americans?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. By the way, someone in the chat asked whether we had seen a draft announcement for Epstein's death that stated the day before he's said to have died. I've seen reports about that, by the way. So for those of you who haven't heard about this, apparently there's a document which seems to be a draft announcement of Epstein's death, which, as I said, was dated the day before the Fed say he died. So they got some splaining to do on that one. And there's also apparently a snippet of a video that has emerged, which shows at around the time that, those cameras outside Epstein's cell stopped working, somebody wearing orange, which might have been a prisoner's outfit, was going up a stairwell in the correctional facility or the prison where Epstein was being held, going up a stairwell to the level where Epstein was being detained or in a cell. And this is the first time. It's only emerged in the last few days. And so reportedly, investigators are trying to figure out who that person was who was moving up to the level on the stairwell towards Epstein around just before he died, or is said to have died. Whether he's actually dead or not, I don't assume that he is. I don't know the story. I don't know the truth here, but I don't simply take their word for it when they say he's dead.
But do you feel like Jeffrey Epstein wrote a will 2 days before his death, or his declared death? Do you believe that's evidence that he committed suicide? If I was about to commit suicide, I would probably write my will a few days before, no?
Yep, that too. And another piece of news which was covered by Breaking Points, apparently there are official documents that have come out which said that the law enforcement authorities have been unable to confirm that the sheet that Epstein supposedly hung himself with was actually used to hang himself. Okay, they haven't been able to identify definitively how he hung himself. So I don't know how that could be a problem. I mean, if you just think about it, he's in this cell, he takes a sheet, wraps it around his neck, hangs himself. Why would it be difficult to establish that he used that sheet to hang himself? You go in there, you take photographs, right? Presumably you could find DNA evidence on this thing, his fingerprints, I don't know. But that just sounds wild. They aren't sure with what material he hung himself. That's what the forensic analysis is now revealing.
Can we exhume his body?
Is there a body? I don't even know that much. So right now at this stage, Rami, I don't trust a goddamn word that
he was buried in an unmarked grave.
He was which?
He was buried in an unmarked grave.
Have we confirmed that? Is that true? He was buried in
the source that I had found, that he was buried in an unmarked grave. I'll send it over to you.
Wow. This whole thing stinks to high heaven. Anyways, we've been going for over an hour and a half, folks. We really appreciate you joining us today. And if you found this to be informative, useful, please do continue to like and share our content. And we are now about to go through 123,000 subscribers. We continue to add thousands and thousands of subscribers every month. And the more we have, the more we can expand the reach of our unapologetic brand of resistance journalism. And my understanding, Rami, is that if you hit the bell icon, you actually will get direct notifications of every report we publish. And of course, you can decide whether or not the subject of the report interests you. But I do recommend that you do that you hit the bell icon so you get notifications of our individual reports, because I think it's fair to say that we're not getting any favors from the algorithm at YouTube. So we need to overcome their efforts to suppress content like ours. Anything else, Remy, you want to say before we go?
I'm really hoping this week to fly to Cuba, where the United States have declared a total oil embargo with the intention of suffocating the country and basically paralyzing factories, hospitals, the electricity rig. So I'm hoping to go there and shed light around the crimes that the U.S. government is committing against Cuba once again. This is 60, 70 years of suffering by the American government. So we need to go there and show the world what's the impact of the oil embargo on Cuba.
Yeah, they're creating a humanitarian crisis across the country. It's appalling, absolutely appalling that as the United States does that, continues to support this genocide, kidnaps Venezuela's president, threatens to confiscate Greenland. You see American athletes parading around the Winter Olympics, and they've excluded Belarus and Russia. I mean, the sheer hypocrisy of this boggles the mind.
And when you see Israel participating, truly, really makes you wonder who Epstein was working with. If he was working for the Russians, he was doing a terrible job. And if he was working for the Israelis, an amazing job.
Yeah. So look forward to Rami's reporting from Cuba. He's got a lot of work to do over there, and I look forward to seeing what you learn from our comrades in Cuba, Rami. That's it for today, folks. Peace out, and thank you for joining us.